32 billion quarters rattled through American arcade machines in 1982, and home consoles crowd the carpet under a Zenith television. Then, barely a year later, retailers slash cartridges into bargain bins. Guess the decade yet? The plastic still smells new, but the business is already rotting. Act 1. Setup. In living rooms, wood grain Atari 2600s sit beside VCRs that still cost real money. CBS airs Dallas and MASH. MTV is brand new. The recession has bruised households, so a console promises one purchase, then endless nights of Space Invaders, Pitfall, and Combat at home. Arcades are still loud enough to feel permanent. In 1981, Pac-Man fever spills everywhere. Lunchboxes, board games, a hit single called Pac-Man Fever. At the same time, personal computers creep in through Radio Shack and Sears. Parents hear educational and open their wallets a little wider. The cartridge solves a pre-internet family argument. One machine in the den can entertain siblings, visiting cousins, and bored adults after dinner. You slide plastic into a slot, hear the switch click, and the television turns into a shared event without leaving the house. It also solves status. In 1982, owning a console says your family has crossed into the future. Kids compare Activision patches earned for high scores. Schoolyard talk carries brand names like Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision. Tuck that clue away. The machine is becoming a social signal as much as a toy. Act 2. Rise. The takeover starts with numbers that look unreal. Atari's sales jump from about $75 million in 1977 to around $2 billion by 1982. Warner Communications treats its game division like a rocket. Activision proves outside developers can make cartridge fortunes without owning the console. Competitors flood in. Mattel pushes Intellivision with George Plimpton commercials that brag about superior sports graphics. Coleco launches ColecoVision in 1982 with a near-arcade Donkey Kong pack-in. The boxes stack in department stores under hot fluorescent lights. Every aisle says the future has room for everybody. Then licensing mania takes over. If a movie, serial, or comic book exists, somebody wants it on a cartridge by Christmas. Magazine ads promise realism the screenshots cannot deliver. Toy buyers at chains like Kmart and JCPenney keep ordering, because last year, every shipment seemed to vanish by December. Peak arrives in 1982. U.S. arcade revenue reaches roughly $8 billion. Home video game sales also surge into the billions. Time magazine runs stories on the boom. Atari becomes Warner's fastest-growing division. In suburban basements, teenagers memorize joystick angles the way earlier kids memorized baseball cards. The confidence turns reckless. Atari pays an estimated $20 to $25 million for home console rights to E.T. The extraterrestrial after the film becomes a phenomenon in 1982. Then it gives designer Howard Scott Warshaw about 5 weeks to finish the game for the holiday season. A second giant bet lands almost simultaneously. Atari manufactures millions of cartridges for Pac-Man on the 2600, reportedly more than the number of installed Atari 2600 consoles in some estimates. The game sells well at first, but players notice the flicker, the muddy maze, the letdown. Act 3, Fall or Twist. Here's where the decade shows its hand. The crash is not one bad game and not one Christmas. It is oversupply, bad forecasting, weak quality control, too many machines, and retailers suddenly realizing they are sitting on stacks of plastic nobody wants at full price. Third-party publishers multiply at a speed the market cannot absorb. Some release competent games, others rush out barely tested cartridges in generic boxes. By 1983, shelves carry products from companies with names shoppers barely know. Consumers get burned, then cautious. A cartridge stops feeling trustworthy. Retailers deliver the blunt verdict. Unsold inventory comes back. Prices collapse. Games marked $34.95 slide to $4.99 in clearance bins under curling sale stickers. Stores cut orders. Cash flow seizes. Companies that counted on one more holiday season suddenly look down and find no floor under them. The damage reaches corporations that seemed untouchable. Warner reports massive losses tied to Atari in 1983. Mattel Electronics, once boasting Intellivision, posts huge write-downs and exits the console business not long after. Coleco survives a little longer on Cabbage Patch Kids money, then falls apart later in the decade. Atari itself changes shape under pressure. In July 1984, Warner sells the consumer division to Jack Tramiel, fresh from Commodore. The famous name survives, but the old empire is gone. Arcade Atari and Home Atari split apart. Hold on to that detail. The brand lives on after the business that made it famous collapses. Now the twist. The phrase video game crash sounds total, but arcades do not vanish overnight, and computers keep selling. Commodore 64s move in huge numbers. Apple II machines stay in schools. In Japan, Nintendo launches the Famicom in 1983 and finds explosive demand almost immediately. That means the industry is not dead everywhere. The American console market is what caves in. In 1985, Nintendo brings the system to the United States as the Nintendo Entertainment System, and avoids the word console wherever possible, and includes ROB to reassure toy stores. Retailers still remember the burn, so Nintendo imposes strict licensing rules, limits annual releases, and adds the gold seal of quality. Those policies are imperfect and sometimes harsh, but they answer a real wound from 1983. Consumers had learned that too many cartridges could mean too little care. And then there is the desert legend. People repeat that Atari buried truckloads of games in a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. In 2014, an excavation confirms it. E.T., Centipede, Missile Command, and other cartridges emerge from compacted trash like evidence from a sealed room. The strange part is how neatly that burial fits the myth. One hated game in a pit makes a cleaner story than spreadsheets, return policies, and panicked purchase orders. But markets usually fail in boring ways first. They sag under bad assumptions. Then somebody finds a symbol everyone can point at. If you pick up a loose 2600 cartridge now, it feels light, thin-ridged plastic. Almost disposable. Yet in 1982, that object sat at the center of one of the fastest booms in American entertainment. A year later, the same object became a retailer's warning sign. The archive note is quieter than the legend. 1983 shows a young medium being mistaken for an endless toy fad, then rescued by companies that treat trust like part of the hardware. The crash kills an industry version of itself. What survives is stricter, stranger, and more resilient. And much bigger. So I closed the vault on a market that looked dead, then returned wearing a gray Nintendo shell and a new set of rules. Lock that memory in the vault, and I'll see you in the next case. Which one of these had you forgotten until just now?